Black settlers were among the first homesteaders in the hills of Dufferin County, but there's almost nothing left to show they were here. In the 175 years since the first known black settler arrived in Dufferin, their stories have been relegated to the names in government records. They are barely mentioned in the tales recounted by Irish and Scottish settlers in local newspapers, and are often left out of those same family histories. The Museum of Dufferin Archives has been researching the first black settlers in an effort to make their legacy in Dufferin County anything but silent roots. The narrative of black settlers in Dufferin is one marked by resilience, determination, and the spirit of community building. Many of these settlers found their way here through the Underground Railroad, a clandestine network of abolitionists, safe houses, and routes designed to assist enslaved individuals in their quest for freedom in the northern U.S. and Canada. This network utilized railroad-themed code words such as stations to refer to safe houses and conductors for those who guided the escapees. Upon their arrival in Canada, they encountered racism and economic hardships, yet they persevered, ultimately establishing themselves as landowners and vital community builders in Dufferin. Those who journeyed along the Underground Railroad initially passed through Pennsylvania and New York before making their way to Canada, with many now settling in York, now known as Toronto, and continuing north towards Grey County. The farther you ventured from the border, the safer you were from bounty hunters tasked with returning individuals to the United States. William Gant, Watson Ballard, and Lewis Gant, three of the earliest settlers in Melanchthon Township and Dufferin, are believed to have traveled the Underground Railroad. William Gant and his wife Marianne Thredwick Gant were born enslaved but later gained their freedom. They departed from South Carolina and made their way north to New York State, traveling via the Underground Railroad to reach Toronto. There, William petitioned the government for land, and on March 12, 1850, he was granted a location ticket for a free land grant of 50 acres at Lot 285, Concession 1 Northeast, on the Toronto-Sydenham Road in Melanchthon Township. During this period, the prevailing sentiment was that prime land was designated for Irish and English settlers, while the less desirable plots and smaller lots were allocated to black settlers. The Toronto-Sydenham Road, later known as the Gravel Road and then Highway 10, ran from Shelburne to Owen Sound and had recently been surveyed. The land agents were providing free grants to people along the road to get the area settled and the road cleared. The land awarded to William was situated on the east side of Highway 10, north of the town of Shelburne, close to what would eventually develop into the community of Melanchthon Station. This property was certainly not ideal. It featured swampy areas and was covered in tamarack and cedar trees. Farming would be a difficult task. The location ticket William received served as verification that he had the legal right to occupy and cultivate the land should anyone question his presence there. With the necessary document in hand, William, Marianne, and their children George, Mary, Charles, William, and Simon journeyed north from York to Melanchthon Township. They walked most of the way, clearing their route, and finally reaching their 50-acre property in late spring of 1850. As part of the conditions for acquiring their land, the Gants were required to clear 12 acres, build an 18 by 20-foot dwelling, and reside on the property until these obligations were fulfilled. By the time the census taker arrived in April 1852, the Gant family had successfully cleared 2¼ acres and sowed crops. They had constructed a single-story log shanty and had also cleared a significant portion of the road in front of their property. The Gants completed their settlement requirements in 1854, and William received the deed to his property, officially known as a crown patent, in January 1855. William was now a landowner and one of the first black settlers in Melanchthon Township. William sold the farm and moved the family 4 miles farther back from the Toronto line and settled on a bush lot. Here they stayed and improved the land, selling it at a profit. In 1861, the family purchased Lot 284, one lot north of their original farm. Here they settled and cleared the land, erected a log home and outbuildings, and remained for several years. While clearing his own farm and assisting neighbors with their logging efforts, William also worked on a substantial section of the Toronto-Sydenham Road. Improvements to this road would facilitate the transport of goods and animals to market and support the township's settlement efforts. By 1871, William and his family had moved west of the gravel road and were renting a 200-acre property at Lot 6, Concession 6, near the hamlet of Jessupville. Then in 1877, William acquired 300 acres of farmland from the Crown, specifically lots 8, 9, and 10 in Concession 5, southwest of the Toronto-Sydenham Road. Together with his sons, they cleared vast stretches of land, becoming prominent farmers in Melanchthon, cultivating beautiful crops of oats, peas, and barley. During the maple syrup season in the spring, the Gants typically tapped an average of 250 trees. William Gant became what we would now refer to as a property flipper. He would purchase bush lots, clear the land, and meet all of the settlement duties, and then sell them for a hefty profit. He was known to be a tall, powerful man who carried out all of his tasks on the farm using a yoke of oxen. If he was engaged in significant logging work for either himself or his neighbors, perhaps 2 teams of oxen would be required. At the same time he was clearing the land and roads, he was preparing the township for settlement and contributed to the early development of the village of Melanchthon Station. Eventually, the Gant family moved north to Albemarle Township in Bruce County, settling in the Coal-Poised Bay area, which is just north of Wyerton. Here they continued purchasing bush lots and improving them for sale. Louis Gant, brother of William Gant, was also born to enslaved parents in the southern United States. He was the eldest of the 8 siblings. It is unclear if William added the H to his last name or if Louis dropped it, but their family connection has been confirmed. It is also unclear if Louis was an escaped enslavement or was a free person of color. He became a sailor and for 12 years was a member of the crew on the steamships that traveled between Buffalo and Chicago along the Great Lakes. He crossed into Canada around 1845. For several years he was employed at the Lambton flour mills, which were situated on the south side of Old Dundas Street on the east bank of the Humber River in Etobicoke. It was during this time that he met and married his wife, Anne Miner, who had recently immigrated from County Monaghan, Ireland. He was awarded a free grant of 50 acres at Lot 258, northeast of the Toronto-Sydenham Road in Melanchthon Township, on October 15, 1849. The property was north of his brother William's property, but a little closer to the village of Dundalk. Although he received his location ticket prior to William, he arrived on the land later, and this made him the 3rd black settler in Melanchthon and Dufferin County. Louis and Anne, along with their daughter Charlotte, relocated to the property in the autumn of 1851. When the census was taken in 1852, it recorded the construction of a single-story log cabin, but no cleared land or crops in the ground. Louis was also well known for working his land with a yoke of oxen, and by 1861 he had cleared almost 25 acres. He and Anne had several more children in that cabin: Mary Ann, Alice, Thomas Michael, Catherine, Margaret, and Louis John. Theirs was one of 4 families that formed the nucleus of what would become the hamlet of McDowell's Corners in northern Melanchthon Township. Although Louis owned and occupied several farms in different sections of the township, he always lived just off of the Toronto-Sydenham Road. He was a well-respected member of the community and a lifelong member of St. Patrick's Catholic Church. To our knowledge, his and his children were the only black members of that congregation. John Sturgis, the first black settler of Melanchthon, was born in Virginia in 1817. He came to Canada before 1842, where he met his future wife, Mary. They had 3 children, Maria, John, and Anne, while living in York. In July 1849, John received the location ticket for a free grant of 50 acres at Lot 259, Concession 1 northeast of the Toronto-Sydenham Road in Melanchthon, the blue highlighted property opposite what would become the village of Corbiton. By 1852, John and Mary had constructed a single-story log cabin and cleared 6 acres of land, planting wheat, rye, oats, potatoes, and turnips. With the abundance of maple trees on the property, they would tap them and boil off maple syrup every spring. In 1857, John sold his farm to James Corbett, a recently arrived Irish immigrant. With assistance from his neighbor, Lewis Gant, who provided the logs and assisted with construction, James Corbett built a large two-story tavern on the property between 1857 and 1860. It's possible that John Sturgis's original cabin was incorporated into the construction of the tavern. Used as a meeting place for township council and a gathering place for travelers and locals, the tavern became a focus of what would become the village of Corbiton. Named for James Corbett, the first businessman in the area, perhaps it should have been named for John Sturgis or Lewis Gant, for without their efforts in clearing the land and making the road passable between towns, making the area more enticing to future settlers, the village of Corbiton may not have been established as one of the main communities in Melanchthon. Watson Ballard, born in 1806 in Pennsylvania, was an enslaved person in Mississippi. Sometime in the late 1840s, Watson crossed the border into Canada and by 1851 had made his way to Peel County. Here he worked as a servant in an inn run by Charles and Lavinia Barrett on Airport Road just north of Caledon East. In 1852, he took up a free land grant in Melanchthon Township at Lot 248, Concession 1 Southwest, just north of Corbiton on Highway 10. He would sell his property and move to Lot 246, 2 lots south, by 1861. Watson's neighbors on Lot 245 were Irish settlers Peter and Margaret Daly and their children. Watson, already a widow by 1851, married their daughter Ellen sometime between 1852 and 1854. Ellen gave birth to their three children, James, Emily, and David, in the small log house Watson built on that 50-acre farm. After the 1861 census, Ellen cannot be found in census records, but Watson lists himself as married, leaving us to believe that Ellen did not die, but rather left her family sometime after April 1861. Watson raised his children with the aid of his mother-in-law, Margaret Daly, who still resided next door on Lot 245. Newspaper articles of the time describe Watson as a handy man of all work, a logger, a ditcher, a farmer, and lime burner. The lime kiln would have been a very important addition to Watson's farm. The lime was used by settlers to make mortar to chink their log houses, as well as to make whitewash, plaster, and many other household products, including soap. This kiln offered an extra source of income for the family. Following his death in 1882, his son David inherited the farm. He added a sawmill to the property, doing work for his neighbors, and over time became one of the wealthiest farmers in the district. In 1897, sensational headlines about the Melanchthon fire gang headed by David Ballard and his brother James. Descriptions in the Toronto newspapers focused public attention for many weeks on the happenings in Dufferin County. Fires began with their own properties before expanding to others for insurance fraud, causing widespread damage and fear. Reports linked them to at least 35 fires. There was turmoil in Melanchthon Township, leading to an increased scrutiny of the area by insurance investigators. The trial became a national spectacle with sensationalized headlines branding them as firebugs, creating lasting notoriety for the area. Both were convicted and sentenced to prison, marking one of the most infamous crime waves in Dufferin County, affecting the local Black community's reputation. We have to wonder why they took this life of arson when David Ballard had once been described as the wealthiest man in Melanchthon. David and James could never have suspected the impact their string of fires would have on insurance companies. In fact, it was the insurance investigator that was instrumental in their capture, having noticed claims for a piano that had been lost in a fire 3 times over 2 years. Dufferin Farmers Mutual Insurance Company had only been established for 2 years, but changed their name after the arson scandal to the Dufferin Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company. The process of investigations and the review prior to issuing a policy was adjusted for all insurance companies following this run of fires. George Hannison is the son of Hannah Ketchum and an unnamed Black male originally from Mali, Africa. Hannison family lore says that Hannah Ketchum, who lived in Toronto with her brother Jesse Ketchum II, was active in the Underground Railroad. The family believes this is how Hannah met George's father. This family tale may be true, but it's equally possible that George's father was a worker in Toronto or a servant in the Ketchum home. There are no archival records to prove or disprove the family story. George was given the last name of Hannison, as in Hannah's son. By historical standards, as the child of an unmarried woman, George was considered illegitimate and could not take the family name. Hannah and her son continued to live with Jesse Ketchum and his family in Toronto for many years. Shortly after the rebellion of 1837, Jesse Ketchum relocated to Buffalo with his family, his sister Hannah, and her son George. It was in the U.S. that George met Mary Graydon Sanders, a widow of Swiss origin, and they married sometime between 1846 and 1847. Their first child, Elizabeth, was born in the United States in 1848. When George's uncle Seneca Ketchum settled on Mono Township on the edge of what would become the town of Orangeville, George and his family followed. George constructed the first stone house in the area and lived there with his wife Mary and their children Elizabeth, Mary Ann, George Albert, Catherine, Emma, John, Alfred Edward, and Mary's two sons from her first marriage, David and Francis Sanders. Their farm was one of the most prosperous in the area. The Hennisons diversified their farming with income from crops, livestock, and textile production, which ensured their success. After George's death in 1865, his son George Albert took over operations. His other son John farmed for a while, but later would become a teacher and then a well-known Presbyterian minister. Alfred Edward Hannison also became a minister, at first in the Territories, then in London, Ontario, and finally in Lambton near Sarnia. Catherine Hannison was one of Ontario's first female telegraph operators and oversaw the office of the Great Northwestern Telegraph Company at Mona Mills. Elizabeth and Mary Ann Hannison never married and lived together in a house in Mono Mills, working as dressmakers. Their work was sought after by many women in the Orangeville and Mono Mills area. Emily moved to Toronto, where she lived with her half-sister Marcella and worked as a nurse caring for her sister's children. The family was very active in the Orangeville community, and George's children became quite influential in town. The Black settlers of Dufferin County overcame significant obstacles to build thriving communities. Their story is one of perseverance, community, and a lasting impact. Their contributions are remembered and recognized as part of Dufferin County's history.